Hey everybody, it's me Lone, I hope you're doing alright. So in the past day, you might have seen a few articles go live which have said, currently on Steam, Starfield is Bethesda's worst rated video game of all time, and how specifically it's also rated lower than Fallout 76 at the moment on the platform. And that of course is noteworthy given the issues that 76 has had in the past, especially when that game launched, right? But I do believe some context and clarification is desperately needed on this topic. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not just going to sit here defending Starfield because I like the game. I'm not going to lie to you, I do like Starfield. When I reviewed the game, I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I stand by that. It's based on my personal experience, but I enjoyed the game. I like the main quest in particular and all the other quest lines, the faction quest lines in particular. I did highlight issues that I had with the game, like planet exploration, for instance. I also don't like surveying to this day, and I don't believe my mind's going to change on that. And in my review, I also specifically said I don't believe Starfield is reaching the heights of Fallout or Elder Scrolls, and I believe that's a pretty fair statement to say. But overall, I still like the game. But just because I like the game doesn't mean I'm going to defend it on this topic unless there's actually a valid and justifiable reason to do so. I'm not just going to be like, it's just because people are review bombing the game on Steam. That's why it's so low. That's a very, very, very small part of it, but it's not the entire picture. And I think if you actually break down this topic, there are some people on both sides, not all people, of course, but some people on both sides of the fence that are being a little bit disingenuous and not bringing up the full context. So I'm going to provide that context to you in this video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like it if you enjoy it, subscribe if you're new, but let's jump right into it. So if you were to head to SteamDB, and I'll link it in the description below, currently on Steam, Starfield has a 71.4% rating, and if you compare that to Fallout 76, that has a 71.76% rating on Steam. Now, these percentages don't quite line up with what you see on the Steam store pages for both of these games, because Starfield has a 75% mostly positive rating on the Steam store page, and 76 has also a 75% positive rating, but it's 76% when it comes to recent reviews. But regardless, it is higher on the Steam store page. Not quite sure why that's going on. It might be because Steam is removing some reviews it believes to be review bombing, and that's why it's generally higher on the Steam store page. Maybe the calculations are just different, but if you actually look at the whole numbers of people providing recommendations versus not recommendations, it is true, it does line up. Starfield is currently Bethesda's worst rated video game of all time on Steam, and it is lower than 76. And at least you kind of have to exclude games like Fallout 4 VR, for instance, because technically, I believe that's also lower than Starfield, but people aren't considering that to be like a full proper release. So that's why there's been a bunch of articles saying that, yeah, Starfield is the worst rated game of all time for Bethesda on Steam. And don't get me wrong, it is clickbait, but it's kind of brilliant clickbait. It's getting people riled up in the comments, getting views. I've done clickbait before in the past. We've all done it. This video is probably going to have clickbait. You know, no one's sitting on a high horse here. So those articles were brilliantly titled, right? But I do believe the context is still needed, and I've seen some articles bring it up, and which has been really good, but others which have not. So the context is this when it comes to, at least specifically when it comes to comparing 76. I'll talk about the Steam reviews later, whether I think it's actually review bombing or not, because I don't believe it's fair to say that. But let's at least look at 76 specifically first. So when it comes to 76, that game was launched on November 2018. Right? But if you remember on PC, the game actually wasn't available to purchase on Steam. It was only available on Bethesda.net, which means, of course, that people could not provide their reviews of the game on Steam at launch. And that was when Fallout 76 was literally in the worst possible state ever. If Fallout 76 was on Steam when it launched, it would have been absolutely slaughtered when it comes to the Steam reviews. It would have been so ridiculously low, and I don't believe it ever would have recovered. I know on Steam you can have recent reviews be higher if the game is improved, and that might influence the overall rating. But I believe that game would have been slaughtered on Steam, that it probably never would have been as high as it is now. Because here's the context. A year and a half later is when the game finally launched on Steam, right? And in that year and a half, Bethesda Game Studios had a bunch of updates, patches, bug fixes, small pieces of content, and then that all culminated into their big Wastelanders expansion, which is when, the game actually launched on Steam. That is why when 76 was on Steam and people could actually review the game on Steam for the first time, that's why it actually had a mostly positive rating. If you remember, it was over 70%. It took a day or two to get there and balance out, but yeah, after a few days, it was mostly positive on Steam, and that was because the game was in a much better state. It had all of those updates, all that new content, and the biggest expansion in the form of Wastelanders, which brought back NPCs to the world, brought back actual quests and actual content to the game. And that's why a lot of people that hadn't played 76 since Starfield's launch, came back to the game and thought, this is actually pretty good. I'm going to give it a positive review on Steam. That's why 76 then had a good review on Steam, or I had mostly positive on Steam, and obviously why it does now as well. The game still has its issues, but it's in a much better state compared to launch. That is the full context. This is why I believe it's a little bit disingenuous to compare 76 right now on Steam to Starfield right now on Steam, because Starfield just came out 3 weeks ago. It hasn't had the same opportunity like 76 has had to get all those updates and all those bug fixes, all those quality of life improvements in particular, and a bunch of DLC and a bunch of expansions and content. It just hasn't had that opportunity. So how can you truthfully compare Starfield's score on Steam right now to 76's score on Steam right now? Because chances are, in about a year from now or 2 years from now, that review rating or that score on Steam for Starfield is going to go up. It will inevitably go up when the game gets a bit better when it comes to bugs and content and all that kind of stuff. I have no doubts when they add in city maps, when inventory management is a little bit better, when there's really cool expansions in the game, that rating is going to go up. And that's when I believe the comparison is going to be much fairer. So yes, it is lower than 76 now, but in a year from now, come back to this video. If I'm wrong, if Starfield isn't rated better than 76, then I don't know what else to tell you. But I do believe Starfield deserves to be higher than 76. It is not, especially when you compare the content of both games. I believe Starfield should have a higher rating than 76. And the only reason in my eyes that it doesn't have so now, or one of the reasons I should say, that it doesn't have so now is because it hasn't had the opportunity to be patched and updated like 76 has. But let's actually look at some of the reasons as to why Starfield currently still has this low rating. It's not low rating, it's still mostly positive, but has a lower rating than other Bethesda games like Fallout 4 and Skyrim and all that kind of stuff. Because I also don't believe that it's just because of review bombing. That is definitely happening, but I believe it's happening around the edges. I've seen some tweets and posts from people that have said, yeah, I just purchased the game, played it a little bit and refunded it and left a negative review just because I don't like Bethesda, or because I don't like, I'm engaged in console wars. Or clearly that's what they were engaging in, right? I've seen some people clearly do that. And if you actually filter on Steam to people that have only played the game for like within an hour, for instance, there's a lot of negative reviews coming from that. And that, you can't say those are just review bombings either, because maybe people just didn't have the game working properly on their PC and they refunded it and they left a bad review, and that's entirely within their right to do so. So yes, I'm sure that there are people review bombing the game right now on Steam, and that's contributing slightly to that lower rating, but I do not believe it's the majority. Like, if you actually look at these reviews on Steam, there are a lot of people with tens, if not hundreds of hours of playing the game, then providing their reviews and giving valid criticisms. Starfield has valid flaws, or flaws which deserve valid criticism. There's no other way around it. I've pulled up this one review, right, of someone that has 194 hours on record. So not someone just played the game and give it a negative review because they can. Someone that actually dedicated a lot of time to this game and said that they don't like exploration, that the weapons are kind of bad, space combat and spaceship combat is a bit of a joke. Like, actual valid criticisms. There's no FOV slider, no brightness slider, no gamma slider. The PC settings are a little bit, limited at the moment. There's other reviews that I've seen as well about people complaining that there's no city maps in the game. I've personally talked about exploration and how it's not the same sense of exploration like Fallout 4 and Skyrim. There are definitely valid criticisms for Starfield. There's no doubt about it. And also as well, even if you do still consider like all these other positive aspects of Starfield, and I still do believe there's a lot of great things about this game, it's also a very different game to Skyrim and to Fallout 4. And that might be why a lot of other people don't like Starfield as much, or they're giving it a not recommended, because it's not comparing to their previous BGS experiences. Like, it's not the same as Skyrim or Fallout 4 when you're in the one world, in the one map, and you can't walk 2 meters without finding something interesting. Whereas with Starfield, when you're doing exploration, you're constantly in menus having to fast travel everywhere, and you can't just go to a planet and find something interesting because a lot of them are procedurally generated. In the cities, exploration is obviously way, way, way better, but it's not the same sense of exploration as past BGS games. And a bunch of other stuff like that as well. Starfield is just not for some people. It's a certain particular type of game that some people are going to like and some people aren't going to like. So I don't believe we can just completely discount everyone's valid reviews and criticisms of the game on Steam just because some people might be review bombing. That's definitely happening, but I don't believe it's the majority of or anything like that. So those are my opinions on this topic. Am I fence sitting? Sure, but I will say that I still like Starfield. I don't believe it currently deserves, you know, a lot of the criticism and hate that it's getting, but I can see why people aren't recommending the game on Steam. And it's also the way the Steam system works. It's looking at recommendations versus not recommendations. People aren't rating the game out of 10 like they are on Metacritic, for instance. So that also kind of contributes to how the reviews look on Steam. But still, yes, it is rated lower than 76 at the moment. It's rated lower than other Bethesda games at the moment. I expect it to increase over time, and it might get to, you know, 75%, 80%, whatever it might be. But right now it's not, and I don't believe it's all just down to review bombing, even though I love the game. Okay, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Oh man, I love sitting on the fence. And until next time, this has been Load. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.